All right. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Kenny. You're not. This is the Indie Show. We've got a special guest, and he's going to act as co host tonight because we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, mostly around sound recordings and such. Phil Anderson is a music producer. He's a mixing engineer. He does mastering. He's worked with some really great people in the industry. We're going to talk about that tonight and maybe some of his processes. We met through a common friend, um, Sasha Hubert, who is with a band called Slant Six. Those guys are from Edmonton, Alberta. And I know that Phil's done some work for them. He's done work with a whole lot of other great bands. We'll talk about those tonight. But before we do, let's get Phil on the camera here. Hi, Phil. Good to have you here.
Hi, good to see you.
Edmonton, Ontario, Edmonton, Alberta.
Yes.
Good to have you. We're gonna flip things back here. I'm gonna get rid of that video that we just played, and hopefully we can get you and I up on camera here. There we go. Put you over there. Oh, you're partly cut off. We got you half your face. There
There
we
we
go.
go.
So you've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, 40 years.
What was your interest in this? Now you were a musician as well, right?
Yeah, I toured back in the 80s, like 19. I went on the road from about 81 to 86. So every night, playing in a different city, playing weeks in clubs back when you could. And then after that, I worked for radio for a couple of years as a producer. And then I went to Recording Arts College, and I wound up getting my teacher's job. And then I wound up taking and developing my own school.
Yeah, so you developed your own college
Yeah,
for training people to do sound engineering.
yeah, we were fully accredited. Did that for 20 years.
And was that out of Edmonton?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We taught a lot of people.
And you developed that process before Metalworks had their school going.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and you said before the show we were talking a little bit about this that when you did some work at Metalworks when they opened their mastering lab, you were doing work in their mastering lab, and you got to know Gil Moore.
Yeah, yeah. No, Gil was a really big part and a big supporter. He and Alex helped me out with a lot of things. And then, of course, Nick Blagona and I wound up doing a lot of work together. We were in each other's backyards. He would be at my place for months.
So Nick Blagona was like goes way back to the days of Le Studio.
Yeah,
That's in Quebec, right?
yeah, yeah. He was one of the main engineers, and he did a lot of massive albums. And prior to that, he was in England working for Decca.
And that studio, did you do work out of that studio as well?
I've been there, and the band I wound up playing with recorded there, um, but I never got to work in there. But being
It,
in the
it,
building, it was great.
yeah, is it really in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, yeah, just out by a lake. The guy that built it initially, who started it all, his parents had a cabin by the lake, and they had some land, and said, "Let's build a recording studio and a place where artists can get away and be themselves and not be in the city and relax." They had a beautiful chalet there. They had a chef. They had a vintage Rolls Royce that would go pick the artists up from the airport in Montreal, and away they go.
Wow. That
Yeah.
I mean, and there, I mean, being able to work with somebody of his caliber, was that someone you looked up to back in the day when you were doing work with Nick?
Well, at the end of the day, I was doing okay in Edmonton. There were four studios, I think, at the time, and I was doing really well because I was one of the first guys to take on digital tape. I did, a lot of stuff in analog, but it was $1,250 to get started for tape costs just to start doing a basic album, like a really basic album. And then when I went over to digital tape, then I attracted a lot of artists, and I wound up doing a ton of independent projects out of Edmonton. And at one point, I just sort of went, that's I got to do better. And I saw an advertisement in Mix magazine for the mastering lab there, and I figured, you know what? I'm going to take this project out that I'm working on. I'm going to go out there and see what they're doing, and maybe get some advice.
Right. Did you ever run into a lady named Cindy Weichman?
No, no.
So Cindy was at Metalworks in the 2000s when they mastered Helix's 30th anniversary video.
Cool.
So I mean, just that history. Cindy and her husband Reiner were well known in the London, Ontario area.
Okay.
Uh, Played in several different projects. They had a prog rock band back in the day called Nail. I think they recorded three CDs. Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were three CDs you guys recorded. And they know a ton of people in the music industry as well. Cindy and her husband Ryan are actually going to be on the show in May. We're going to have them on the show in May. We're going to talk about
Nice.
their experience in the music industry. So when you were working with Nick,
Mhm.
that led you to do some work at Metalworks because they opened up a mastering lab there.
So Nick was mastering the projects for me, and then I wound up. Alex and Gil sat down and said, "Why don't you mix here?" And they had a smaller room with an SSL in it, and so I started mixing out there, and that was a game changer, especially in Edmonton on a local level. And then Nick started coming out and producing projects in Edmonton with me. And then we would go back out to Metalworks and mix and master out there.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about the work that you've been doing is that from what I can see, and you guys can you can go there to philsmix.com if you want to check out his works, his clientele. You've got a lot of repeat clients that come back to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's a good sign.
They like your work. They like working with you. Um, and is it all like do you do the tracking with them in the studio, or did they bring you sometimes tracks that are already recorded and then they're asking you to do the mixing on them?
It's getting 50-50 now. With the industry the way it's changed, and as budgets really got slashed in the middle, just after Napster showed up, so around 2006, we really noticed a significant change to how things were being done in the industry. And so I wound up having to mix things. And I had the opportunity of having Rich Chicky mix stuff, Nick mix stuff, a guy named Graham had mixed stuff. And, it was collaboration in this business is that's the way things should be done. And it's slowly coming back, but collaboration pretty much stalled out because everybody was just trying to make a few bucks to keep the lights on. And
Right.
I really did not enjoy mixing my own productions. And finally, the stress was starting to get to me. And I finally went, I got to learn how to mix better. And I sat down and started paying attention to who was mixing records. And once I had that sort of sorted out, within about 3 weeks, I got an email going, "How would you like to study with Andy Wallace in the south of France?" So I went, yes.
And how much of a game changer was that for you?
It was huge. Yeah. To spend a week with Andy, and you can talk to any other mixer on the planet, and they're like, "How did you even get to meet the guy?" And then the next year with Chris Lord Alge, and the year after that with Michael Brower. And then I started doing some work with Jack Joseph Puig, bringing him out mostly for educational stuff, and then getting him involved. Lastly, in the last 3 years with the Econoline Crush.
Wow. So through that whole process, there's all these learnings that everybody coming on to work with you after those points in time, they're getting a newer and improved version of you each time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because you can pass things all along the way, and the great thing about education is students are going to ask you questions that you would never think of. It's a two-way street. And, giving an hour lecture every day makes me pretty confident being able to talk to people about just about anything now.
Yeah, and you're and as a teacher, you're constant. You end up becoming a student as well because learning is a lifelong process.
Oh yeah, I've got all these guys coming in now with urban projects, of which I have, no personal background in the lifestyle, right? I mean, it's just like, but you listen to what's going on, and the rules kind of apply the same, and you bring stuff to the table they never even thought of. And I've had some success, and I've had, work with guys like Mac Miller, getting to actually track him.
Right.
And that's.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I saw happening in the early 2000s were record labels starting to trim everywhere. Like, because of the change in digital and because of, what was going on with Napster and LimeWire and all those file sharing services,
Yeah.
and the fact that sort of the value of music was dropping out of the bottom, um, record labels had to pick and choose, and they kept the rainmakers, and those that weren't making them big money, they were letting them go, and sometimes they were shelving projects altogether.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was no money. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't really put to like they had probably like honestly probably a 3 month window of when Napster came out to actually shut that down and create some laws to prevent theft. But that they just sort of went, well, this is ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't sound as good. Nobody's actually going to take this that seriously. But by then, everybody had taken it seriously. It
Yeah,
was pretty
by then
insane how it
digital,
took it
yeah,
down.
digital had caught on, and digital became, I mean, even now CDs are like passe.
Oh yeah, people go
Um,
CD player. What's that?
people, I mean, people still will press CDs because fans will want tangibles when they're doing live shows. But what we're seeing is a resurgence of vinyl.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. I walked into London Drugs and I bought about 12 records. Right, I was like, this is great, just to have them. And then I had to resurrect turntables and find parts.
Yeah, I mean, back over here behind me, I've got a Yamaha early 1980s Yamaha natural sound system,
Yeah.
and I love picking up vinyl and listening to it back here while I'm working away in the studio because there's a warmth to it.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a
The-
different there's a different feel to it than listening to digital all the time. And it's like you said, you know, it digital to some degree, and again to how it's mixed and how it's put together
oh yeah,
can lose its flavor.
yeah. Well, back. Don't forget how records were made is a lot different than it is now, and the attention to detail. Because when you were recording to 2 inch tape, you had to understand that what was going to tape was going to sound different coming back. And if you didn't understand that, you were done. You were not a recording engineer. You needed to understand the type of top end that needed to get into the deck, but you could also rely on it for a little bit of compression, not as much as some people think. And then, of course, the bottom end warmth was really nothing more than the head gap resonating at 60 hertz, creating this extra bottom end that people have tapes warmer. Well, not really. And at the end of the day, it's not as punchy as digital. Like what you go to digital with, it comes back. So digital tape was, in my opinion, a better format. You just need to understand why you had to do certain things to get to analog tape to work.
Right.
And then once you knew that, then you could make sure that digital recordings could sound good as well. And understand that the microphone choices are actually, we were talking about earlier an AKG 414 sounds really good going to tape when it's analog, but when you go to digital, it's a little bright by other standards. It's
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
it's interesting how those things change things up, and things that are game changers. I mean, backing up a little bit when we were talking about earlier, when you made the switch from analog tape to digital tape,
Yeah,
that would have been a game changer for a lot of people, because everybody else was still recording, on analog tape when you made the jump to digital.
yeah.
And and how did that change things for you? Like, for a guy like me, I consider myself a hack when it comes to doing this stuff. So when it comes to making the switch from analog to digital, what did that what was that process? What did it look like for you?
Well, I worked for radio, so I was using analog tape all day long and editing like crazy and using a razor blade and understanding that process and what it sounded like. So when digital came along, I think it was session 8 was the first thing I used. It sounded awful. Like the conversion was horrible. And then I got the Tascam D88s and they sounded pretty good. And we also had the first 3348 Sony desk or deck at the school I was at. And
Right.
I remember when we fired that up next to the Ampex 1600, it sounded awful. We thought it was broken. We thought it maybe there was a problem, but no, it's actually how it sounded. And then we found out you had to spend another $48,000 on conversion to get a $300,000 deck to sound good. Now, you can find one of those decks for 5 grand.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the guys that I know that does mixing and mastering and recording the whole ball of wax, Beach Road Studios. His name's Siegfried Meyer. I don't know if you ever heard of Siegfried.
Yeah, I've heard of
Uh,
them. Yeah.
he used to teach at OEArt,
Hmm.
and then he inherited a whole bunch of their old gear, and he's a real gearhead. He has I think it's an old SSL board that was commissioned by Alex Lifeson that he actually rebuilt.
There you go.
So he'd be a guy that you should meet.
I think so. Yeah.
So I'll give Zig your information. You guys should probably at least chat online, or you should go and see him at Beach Road. And maybe he should come out and see you, because you guys have that in common. He really is, a real champion. He's younger than you. I don't know how much younger than you, but I know at least a decade younger. And so he's one of these guys that still champions using, using the board with all of the onboard rack mount stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think that he's using a ton of digital wear other than the DAW. Um, I don't know that he's using a whole bunch of digital stuff, and the stuff that he's constantly doing. He did something. He developed something this past year, and he took it out to NAM. He went to NAM this year,
Okay.
and he took it out. There was something he developed. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
But because he's a gearhead as far as I'm concerned. The stuff he talks about is like way beyond my level of understanding. But I'm sure you and him would get together and we'd be like,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Go to the NAM show, and that's you're exhausted by the end of the day, but the conversations are pretty cool.
that's
Um,
that's my understanding when he went, was that you have some great conversations with some people that are in the industry and what they're doing.
yeah. Well, I really honestly think that you really need to have a good grasp of how digital works. And if you're going to be an actual engineer, you better know how analog works, especially how a recording console, uh, why it works, so that you can decide and if that's the path you want to go on. You don't have to, but if you've never worked on a desk and haven't mixed on an SSL, don't knock it till you try it, because it is something else. It's a little bit of work, And it's, the recall, you got to actually manually do it. It takes all of 15 minutes, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like from what I understood from our conversation prior to it, it's like being able to add different spices or maybe even different flavors into the mix that
Yeah.
you wouldn't get going pure digital.
No, you don't like there are plugins that emulate the EQ real well. Like you put them side by side, the first 6 dB, it's the same thing. But start pushing the desk EQ and you'll experience something completely different that the plugin does not do. And it's a conversation that has been mentioned 1,000 times.
Right.
Just go do it and try it. Just go to a studio and hire the guy for an afternoon just to hang out with him and go through it. It's in your best interest to understand that so that you know what you could be expecting or what you might be missing out on. Just
Did you
one thing
find
like
did you
this.
find did you find like desk EQ
Yeah.
is it more or less sensitive than the digital one?
It's the same until, like I said, and then once you start to push it after, I don't know, you get about 6 dB, and then the desk starts to get a lot more aggressive than you would find um, than the plugin. The other thing is there's 1081 Neve stuff, 1084s, the 1073, that series of things, and understanding how they work and appreciating what they can do when you push them. And I see young guys using them and they're cut EQing them. And I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah,
Find what's interesting and boost it.
I've used analog boards for years for doing live mixing.
Sure.
And playing in bands over the years, and I was always the guy responsible for our mix. And a lot of times, um, you know, our sound check, I would get to the point where I knew exactly where everything needed to be on the board for our live mix.
Yeah.
And then really all it was just matter of just tweaking levels after that.
Yeah. Once it's sort of set up, there's, you know, very common things that are happening there that you may miss because you don't see it all in front of you at the same time.
Right. Well, at some point in time, I am going to be out west, so I may have to pop in and see you
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
experience that firsthand, because I think that would be a great education just to be able to do that. I don't know that it's something that at this point in my career doing what I do, that I would probably see the need to invest in that, because finding a really really good SLSL board is going to cost you a bit of coin.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Okay.
You don't need to do everything. You don't need to, writing a song that's enough. And then being the performer, well, that's enough. Okay, stop there. But now you have to be the engineer.
I don't like doing it all.
Yeah, and then you got to be the mix engineer, and then you got to be the mastering engineer, and you go, well, I bought all the plugins, I watched the video. How come it's not working? Well, I'm sorry, but being good at each one of those jobs is enough.
Yeah,
And getting
it's kind of
experience.
like the difference between being a blender and a Molinex food processor. You can only
Right.
do everything moderately well, but maybe only one or two things really really well. I would prefer just to do what I do, write music and perform, and
Yeah.
leave the rest to somebody else.
Oh, yeah. Like I've engineered, produced, and mixed projects, and I don't like it. I prefer if I could get somebody else to mix for me. Like I just had Joel Wanasak mix something over the weekend, and I get stuff sent to me for mixing a lot through Moore Applebaum mastering
Right.
because he'll get mixes from bands that are, he's not going to take their money. He's like, look, I can't master this. I'm not going to, make you pay me this much money and not give you the result that you're hoping for. The mastering is there to make sure every song, the song sounds like it was recorded at the same time,
Yep.
and that he's bringing some energy and bringing something interesting. And how he works, he's a very artistic mastering engineer. He's not one of these guys that sits down and go, oh, we got to watch the LUFs for Spotify, and that's all they're talking about. He'll never talk to you about that stuff, ever.
Yeah, you actually, I think you mentioned that very thing on your website. When I went there and was reading on your website, you talked
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, I'm pretty adamant about collaboration. It's really important. I mean, you
Yeah.
get to meet everybody else's, you know, who you've worked with, and you're networking.
As a musician, how hard was that for you the first time you went to studio and let somebody else take care of all that?
Well, as a bass player, I was very excited just to be there. I mean, it was just like finally, this is the big time, you know. We were at
Right.
Mushroom Studios in Vancouver,
Right.
and which was a historic place. And I already knew that going in. Loverboy had been in there, and Chilliwack, and all these other bands. But
Right.
um, going forward and going, to the point where all of a sudden I was getting involved, it was just the series of events. That's a whole nother day.
There,
That's a long conversation.
it's interesting. So some of the first artists on the label came from Burnaby, the Burnaby area,
Right?
and they went down into California to record their first EP at Trend Duff Studios with Jeff Blue.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't know much about Jeff at the time. Then I started looking at his resume, and I'm like, Linkin Park and all these other bands that he worked with over the years. And they dropped some really good coin going down and doing this recording down at Trend F Studios. And they made the same fatal mistake that a lot of young artists make is they thought, well, we'll just publish it and put it out there and hopefully it'll go viral. Well, it didn't.
It doesn't work.
Like it didn't. They needed the push behind it. And you know, I, I'm I'm not like the labels of old where we bankroll artist money.
Yeah.
I don't have the
Yeah.
pockets for that. But what we do is get their music out in front of as many people as we can, and
They
we
got
try
to
to
play
get
live.
we try to get the music playlisted
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So the interesting thing is when they came to me, I said, "Well, we got two problems. One of the problems is that you spent a lot of money on this and you never did any real promo to push it out there in front of the public. And then the second is you already put it out there. So now it's no longer in the digital world. So, can you imagine if it had been released on vinyl or on a CD originally and only
Hmm.
hit a small market, then you can treat it like a fresh release.
Yeah.
But once a song becomes digital and it hits the digital world,
Yeah.
there's a digital fingerprint for that work called an ISRC.
Yeah.
And now that song is now considered old news.
Oh, yeah. Think about this. Think about this. You're sitting there, you're a young band, you hear an album, I want to sound like that. So now that's all you're focused on is trying to sound like a band that had already released that album 3 years earlier. Now you're 3 years behind.
That's right.
Get in there, do what you do, find somebody who understands that concept, which there's very few of us guys left, which is scary to think about, and get in front of an audience and earn your fan base. Now, you're going to have to tour. You're going to have to play in front of people. That's where you're going to make a living. And you're going to have to invest in yourself that way. Now, there are a lot of ways, as you know, that you can get music out to your audience, which is great. It's there immediately. But the fans are the people that saw you live and you had a connection with. You made them go, wow, that was fun. That guy live was cool. I've I've played with some pretty amazing players. There's a guy in town here. His name is Bobby Cameron. We played in a lounge. In fact, I just walked in. I had my bass in the back of my car. I knew he was there, and I just said, "Hey, you want me to play bass with you today?" He goes, "Yeah, sure." There were two people. Then a baseball team came in. Bobby is so good that that audience of now 16 people were all fixated on him playing his own material. And then we do a couple covers, and literally the baseball team's going, "Stop playing the other stuff. We want to hear your music again." Some, you know, 16 people in a baseball team, they were not there to come see a live artist. They were there to have a beer after the team, you know, have some fun. They
Yeah.
didn't realize they were going to get that experience. And all of them were big fans of his that night. And
Yeah,
you can,
it's amazing how a small experience like that can be a big thing for an artist. You know, and it only takes one person to share your music with somebody else, who shares it with somebody else, who shares it with somebody else. That,
absolutely.
you know, and that has been, I think that's been where we've been able to shine as a record label, because we use organic growth. That's it.
Yeah.
Strictly organic growth. There's nothing artificial about what we do. In fact, you know, I don't want to do anything artificially, because
Yeah.
it's not real. It is not real engagement. It's not real people on your music. Now, there's things you can do to boost your music that are completely legit.
Yeah.
And for some artists that are maybe not major touring artists, some artists on our label don't tour at all. They're just recording artists.
Yeah.
And they're not interested in necessarily playing live shows. They're interested in just putting their music out in front of as many people as they can and see if it resonates with people as much as it resonates with them.
Oh, yeah. People will recognize something that's good. But I'll tell you, learning how to play live so when they do get in front of an audience is everything.
Oh, it's a big deal.
Yeah. So you're doing really well, and you go play live and you're horrible because you're not used to being in front of an audience. Or maybe it turns out you're using auto tune, or you're aligning things up because you couldn't play, or there are a lot of things that you can do now that live aren't going to do you any good. And again, that performance. And also, you learn about yourself as a musician and as a performer by playing live. It's such a win 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 situation. It's not something that should be dismissed. Like, you really want to get out there and play for people. And you'll recognize that you're having an effect on them. Then that should motivate you to see some, especially once they know your songs. And all of a sudden they're singing them back to you while you're playing. It's perfect strangers to you, but they know who you are.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like our band I was telling you about before the show, we record here in the studio, and everything we do is live off the floor. So if someone was to come to hear us play live, we sound exactly the same as what
That's
we
awesome.
sound here in the studio. And so we play a couple of live shows a year. That's it.
Yeah.
And we usually play at a friend of mine that's he owns his own shop. He works on my Harley Davidson, and they have a couple of bike rallies a year. We play at the bike rallies. It's to the
Nice.
point. It's to the point now where they'd rather us play our own music than the cover tunes.
There you go.
You know,
That's
so
that's what you should.
yeah, it's great because you know you get to share your music, and sometimes we'll just introduce a song, and they're like, "Who's that by?" I'm like, "It's by us." Oh, that's awesome, man. That's even better because it's something
Right?
you guys wrote, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's nothing more rewarding than getting that feedback from people. But
Yeah.
because of our recording process, we always feel we're stage ready because we perform it. And our goal here is not finding the best mix each week because like I said, we worked hard to dial in that mix. It's finding the best performance of that song.
Yeah.
you know. And it's funny because we'll have like 10 recordings of one song that we've written, and we're like this one better. It's a version of the song. It's not the song, because when you play a song live, you're never going to play it the same each time.
There's the catch. And there's where, okay, if you break down the process of really how this should work for a band, okay, you guys write songs and you want to go into a recording studio. And trust me, when I was young, I made this mistake. Band would phone me, we want to come and record an EP. Okay, great. So we come in, we record them. I'd make some suggestions. We'd fix the mistakes. We'd mix it, set it out there, and 150 people would buy CDs.
Right.
Friends and family. What I learned from Nick was simply, how does the song sound before you record it? Commit to making it great. Commit to finding the part that works the best for the song, and then write another one.
That's right. That's
and
right.
Get out there. And now the other part is you go play for the audience. Now, what the band's favorite song is, and what you love playing compared to maybe this other song that you thought might have been a dog, well, it turns out the audience loves it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and you also have that experience of that eclectic experience. So, for example, we will, like I said, we run the DAW every week. We're here in the studio,
Awesome.
so we'll play and record a song that we already recorded, put out there, and the guys are like, I like that version better than the one that we put out.
Well, it could have been the performance, right?
It usually is, and sometimes it varies. I mean, you know, our lead guitar player reminds me when we talk about this. You know, he said, my lead solo for our songs is going to be different every time because I don't put it to muscle memory. I put it to feel.
Mm-hmm.
What I feel off you guys is what I end up putting into the song. And that can change from week to week, because if you come into the studio and everybody's in a funk, it's definitely going to sound different than it did if everybody's in an up mood.
Yeah. So the studio, I mean, at the end of the day, is your chance to, do your best work. And to your point, this feels bad. I don't want to play. The band's in a bad mood. Blah blah blah. Now, you get into a situation where you've got a producer and you've got a record company that's putting a lot of money into what you're doing.
Right.
And the idea is you want to get it out to your audience. Now, guitar, first off, why is there a guitar solo in the song in the first place? To make the song better. So if the solo is not improving the song, then it should be cut in half or removed. There's that option. Or let's come up with a real good solo that's, as a guitar player, that's what you should be striving for, is how do I make the song better? And what's the key ingredient? What makes this work? Now, I'm going to suggest that if you go to, let's say you go to see Rush play and Alex isn't playing the same solo in Limelight, you're going to be really upset.
Yeah, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But it's an interesting thing, because
unless it's blues and jazz, then then it gets a pass on that.
I guess it depends on what people come there expecting. Ken McInnes says energy is everything, and I agree to that point.
Yeah.
But I remember listening to an interview with Eric Clapton. He said, if you come to one of my shows and you expect me to play the same solo that I played on the record for Layla, you're not going to hear it.
Yeah. He's definitely going to do his own thing. That's for sure.
And also, for musicians that have been on the road that many years, he doesn't always have the same road musicians with him. He might have a different bassist. He might have a different drummer.
Yeah.
And that's going to change the dynamic And you know that as a
Oh yeah,
like you walk into a project as a bassist and you have a different flavor than the previous bass guitar player, and all of a sudden the whole dynamic of the band changes.
yeah. Oh yeah. One person will make a massive change to the band.
Oh,
That's for sure.
when we locked into the bass player that we have now and our drummer that we have now, I always tell them they're the band. You know, we're just the icing on the cake.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Supporting the song.
yeah. I mean, if the song doesn't sound interesting from the rhythm section point of view, from my perspective, when we're writing a song,
Yeah,
the groove is what keeps people engaged in the song. If you don't have a good groove, you know,
yeah,
then to me, yeah, you can have good lyrics and you can have good guitar work in it, but if you don't have a good groove that locks people into something, you got to have a groove that locks people in.
yeah, yeah. It was always the comment was really the formula was always like this. You needed somebody who could sing in time or in tune.
Yep.
Then you needed a great drummer, and then you needed a guitar player who could sing, and then you needed a bass player. Now, depending on what that guy's all about, is he gluing the band together? Is he directing traffic while things are going on stage? Or do you tool the top end out and just let him murmur around in the bottom end and hope?
Yeah, I guess so. Something I want to talk about tonight too is I think you mentioned it in your website, and I think I've seen it in things that you've talked about previously.
Yeah,
Is the whole difference between being producer and mixer?
yeah, they're two totally different jobs.
Do you prefer one over the other?
Um, yeah, I prefer. It's funny. I prefer to produce bands. Mixing turned showed up out of necessity because between like for 10 years I had Graham or Rich Chicky or Nick Blagona mix for me my productions, and as a result, the production sounded great, and they liked working with me as well. Like it was definitely a two-way street, and you know when you have to do all of the jobs, it's fatiguing. And if I'm gonna do the mixing and the production and the engineering, there's a couple things that I've learned, and that is okay. If I'm mixing the band that I'm producing, the band's going to have little to no say in the actual mix because they think I'm still producing the band. And then the other rule is the guitar player can't talk about the guitar. He can talk about the drum, he can talk about the bass, he can talk about the vocals, but he can't talk about the guitar. And the bass player can't talk about the bass as it goes, right?
Right. So eliminating that bias.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there was a plan on how it was going to sound at the beginning, and if the band just wasn't delivering because they've been in the basement for a long time recording, and all of a sudden they get into a real situation, realize that they haven't improved, they haven't done anything new. You run into a big problem, and now you've got to get out there, play live, see what you do, leave it alone, put it out. I mean, it's a snapshot of where you're at.
Now, there's a big game changer for you too, because we're talking about what happened back in 2006 with the advent of Napster and all that stuff, and how it changed the whole digital landscape, and budgets dropped. The bottom dropped out of budgets.
Yeah,
So producers and mixing studios and whatnot were now looking at other opportunities, not just major bands that were out there, but they were also starting to produce for independent artists that would came in and would fund the projects themselves.
yeah. Well, it used to be, a 24 track deck, a Studer deck for 24 tracks was $75,000. you could open up a recording studio with 3 Tascam decks for 25 and a DAT machine. So let's put 30 grand to it. So less than half the cost. And then the band could afford to come in and spend $80 on digital tape versus 1,250 bucks that would get you the bare minimum you would need to do a really basic record. Like you were just getting across the finish line with 1,250 bucks for analog tape. And by the way, it was only 24 tracks if you didn't have automation.
Right.
When digital stuff came along, the cost of everything dropped. And then companies like Mackie showed up with a desk that sounded okay. And you could do a local demo that would sound better than an MCI with a Sound Craftsman 2-inch machine. I mean, there was a lot of things hit the market at the same time. I was just really fortunate to have the wherewithal and the understanding of being in the studio to see that was going to work for me and the people that I knew. That's all it was. There was no genius behind it. It was just, it showed up and I was the right guy at the right time. And fortunately, I had a lot of experience recording with analog tape because, again, I said I was, get this, mixing 100 commercials a day for radio.
Oh, wow. I mean, prior to all this stuff too, you were doing productions for artists that were working for major labels or working with major labels. And then, of course, there was a game changer that came in there in terms of working exclusively with that, because now all of a sudden it became more affordable for independents to get into the game.
The record companies stopped making money. They had like about a 3-month window to actually put some laws in to protect publishing. And that didn't happen.
Yeah, and everybody hated on Lars Ulrich for that, didn't they?
Well, he was the one that said, this is illegal. And he was right.
Yeah, he was instrumental in getting Napster to court so that he could prove that it was illegal, and then force Congress to start looking at some protections.
Yeah, it was too it was too late.
It was almost too little, too late.
We can't have something for free anymore.
Yeah, and that's still the problem even today, that people want something for free. I mean, a digital download for a song costs $1. It's less than a cup of coffee and lasts you a lifetime. And people won't get off their wallet to buy a digital download, but they'll buy a Tim Hortons coffee that tastes like crap.
So I bought my first 45s when I was, 9, 10 years old, and it cost me $1 then in the 70s, which today would be probably $5-10 per song.
Yeah.
And I was excited. And you know what? You paid attention and you listened to it. And then the money was taken and invested back into artists who were willing to do the work, who were good. And then they would spend 3 to 6 months tracking these records that people do now in 3 weeks. They go, I don't know, I wrote a song, recorded, put it out there, boom. How'd it do? Oh, I got like 10,000 plays on Spotify.
Yeah. 10,000 plays is good, but it's not a moneymaker.
No.
But
plays isn't either.
But could you imagine if those 10,000 people downloaded your song for $1 a track?
That's a different day.
Now there's your budget to go back in the studio and do some real kick-ass recording.
Yeah, and find out how good you could be instead of dabbling.
Yeah, so you have an opportunity to raise the bar and step up your game. And I mean, what a great way. And I've said this, at a record label for the longest time. We have digital downloads off our website. Costs $1 a track to download it in high res audio. You're not going to get that level of audio off, Spotify and other services. And the track is yours forever.
Yeah.
You don't even need to belong to a streaming service. And most artists can offer that to anybody, whether they're working with a label like me or whether they're selling digital downloads directly off their websites and they're using, um, what is that? There's Bandcamp's another one where you can buy digital downloads
No.
in high res audio. So I mean, there's opportunities that exist, but it's like you said, everybody wants something for free.
Oh yeah. And then they put their phone on, on the table while they're having dinner, and that's their entertainment.
Yeah, I mean it's but you're right about the what we talked about before the show. You know, back in the day when we were kids, you and I were kids, we had those transistor radios.
Sure.
Right? I remember having one strapped to my handlebars on my bicycle,
There you go.
listening to music everywhere I went,
Yeah.
right? And I remember taking it off the strap when I'd go down to the local fishing hole and sit there listening to music on a Saturday while I'm fishing for bass.
Right.
I mean, so the
It's
same
the same
thing
thing.
now exists on a phone,
Yeah.
and because of the storage capacity on phones, you could download a really decent library of music and hardly take up any space on your phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
No,
know,
it's cool. I mean, at the end of the day, I love it. To be able to have that flexibility and to be able to send a mix through WeTransfer down to my phone, and then it hooks up to my car through Bluetooth, or I can plug it in through the USB port in the front of my receiver and listen to what I've been working on. It's an amazing tool. And at the end of the day, it's the audience, and that's what it is. It's state of the art. So the next challenge, again, it comes back down to musicians wanting to make a career out of doing stuff. And what you have to do to have a career is get in front of an audience with your merchandise and performance and get out there and get some money from the door. And that's just how it's working now.
yeah, the
And
live show is definitely where the real money is to be made for any artist. It always has been, always will be. You know, it's an interesting thing they said back in the day, and I remember talking to Brian Vollmer about this. When they sold their albums back in the day,
yeah,
if the band could make $2 an album, they were doing good.
yeah, yeah,
You know, and you think about that now, and I've said to artists, I said, you got a 10-track album, right? If people could download your 10-track album for $5, that's like 50 cents a track,
yeah,
but you would make more money on the digital downloads than you'd ever make on streaming.
yeah. Streaming is it's just a platform for your music to exist, and you can send people to go check it out what you're doing. But at the end of the day, um, you know, the average person, they just want to hear music in the background.
Yeah,
Very few people, unless you're in your car, that's kind of the last place. But at home, you don't see a lot of high-end stereo shops around anymore, even. There used
no,
to be like five in the city here where people would spend, 10 grand on a pair of speakers and $5,000 on the power amp. And, next thing you know, 25 grand later, and they've got a stereo. And then they would think about adding on a Pro Logic system to it for another 7,000 bucks. Next thing you know, $35,000, $40,000 entertainment room in your house. No, I'll just plug my phone playing MP3s into my sound bar on my TV.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I remember back in the day when when I had tons of records, and my first practice was I had an Akai reel to reel deck.
Cool.
And I would, every album, as soon as I opened it, I'd record it on my Akai.
Yeah.
And I would
Very
do
fun.
and I would do album after album after album after album. And on one reel of tape, I could have 10 albums.
Yeah.
And we would listen to that all night long.
Well, when
Just
Beta Hi-Fi was around for the whole 2 years it existed, it sounded amazing. You had 75 dB of crosstalk. It was better than that. It wasn't expensive, and you could put a lot of music on one tape. Beta Hi-Fi guys were using it for a two-track for that one year that it was successful. But again, the economy of a VHS shows up. It's $50 less for the
Yeah.
$50 less. Didn't sound as good, and the tracking was bad. And you could go to the video stores had to carry beta and VHS for the longest time, and then all of a sudden they just had to phase the beta stuff out.
Right. Well, if
Uh,
you want to learn stuff about really really good recording, a guy who's worked in both of
yeah,
those fields, you need to go to Phil Anderson's site, philsmix.com, and check it out, because knows a thing or two about both sides. The well, we could call it the dark side and the light side of recording. But
yeah,
you've worked in both of those areas, and you found a way where you're comfortable with a blend of the two.
yeah. They're both. There's nothing wrong with any. You need all the tools in the toolbox. You really do. If you
Right.
want to be a craftsman, you better have the right tools.
Right. And in closing, what do you notice is the biggest difference between working with independent artists versus working with artists that were signed to a label?
They understood the process.
Who
Independent
understood
artists don't have anybody explaining them how to make a great record.
who
Not,
understood the process?
what's that?
Who understood the process?
Well, you would have, the record companies would have record producers that had put out projects that were successful. And then those guys would have the filter of the local A&R reps looking around for bands that could actually play live and were writing songs. And then they would collect them, and then they would do, production deals with the local bands, and finally sift through it till they could get the really good band to work with a really good producer, somebody who understood music production as well, understand how the record company worked. But that process actually worked very well. There's some scary things that happen along the way to people. There's horror stories, but there's also amazing records out there.
Well, you heard it tonight for everybody. Get out and find yourself a guy who's willing to produce your music, who's going to mix it through a great SSL console, and use the magic of digital and all the other goodies that are there at their disposal to produce great music for you and with you. My understanding when we brought you on the show and I talked to Sasha about you, he loved working with you.
Well, that's great. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate
Yeah.
the opportunity.
Well, it's been great having you here. And again, I want to thank you for joining us tonight on the show.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, Phil Anderson at philsmix.com. You can check it out over there. Remember, this has been the Indie Show. I'm Kenny. You're not. Have a great end of your week, everybody. We'll see you.